Hello.
Hello, Sylvia.
Good evening.
Nice to see you. Or at least your symbol.
Yeah. Nice to hear your voice.
Yeah.
I hope your Passover holiday and your beautiful family all.
Yeah, well, thank God we had a wonderful Passover. And we even got minions most days, so that was all good.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah. Were most of your family able to gather?
Yeah, except the one, that weren't there. My son Moshe, who's 17, was stuck in Israel. Not a bad place to be stuck.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone else was here, except for my daughter, from California, who wasn't able
Right.
to come.
Poo. That's great. I spent the holiday at David's house in West Hartford. The
That
whole
was nice.
holiday,
That
9
must have
days.
been nice.
I went there for 9 days. And it was beautiful for me, just beautiful.
I'm sure.
It's getting dark. Oh, okay. I hope people remembered the change of time.
I hope so too. I did send it out. Sometimes it takes people a bit of time to, to get with the program. It's just the way it is. Okay. Okay. Yeah.
No problem.
Okay, so I am now going to post the Haftarah, and of course I'll read it. So read from it. So we all.
Well, Rabbi, you're not doing it just for me.
Well, I'm going to read from it anyways. No, but I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm live on like 5 different platforms. So it isn't just for the locals.
Oh.
So don't worry. I would be doing this even if you had not shown up. Okay. And I sent out an email. We don't have a class Wednesday or Thursday. The only Parsha class this week will be 12:30 on Friday. I just have a convoluted week, and I can't guarantee that I'll, be free during that time. Okay, So Friday is the next.
Friday at what? At
12:30. We're back to 12:30.
12:30.
12:45 was actually a mistake. It just got perpetuated because I kept cutting and pasting the announcements.
Yeah.
Okay, so now let's talk about the connection. The Haftarah is from chapter 2 in Shmuel Bet chapter 6 through most of chapter 7. And I will, I'm going to put it up and I'm going to share. Okay, I'm going to share screen. Okay, so it's 2 Samuel chapter 6. Okay, now, so here's the story. This is towards the end of David's reign, and this is where he purchases the place to put the ark, which is the Temple Mount from Arvana the Jebusite. And now he's bringing the ark up to Jerusalem, to the place where his son Solomon would later build the temple. However, just as out of the incredible holiness of the Holy of Holies, Aaron's sons made an error, and at the moment of the joy of the dedication of the temple, walked into the Holy of Holies, not bidden by God, and the incredible holiness there was too much, the incredible revelation was too much for them to handle, and it literally blew their fuses, and they died. So the same thing happens with Uzzah, who was a very righteous person, but he made an error concerning the ark. And then the Jew, just as in the case of the dedication of the Mishkan, the Jewish people overcame their mourning, and so too happened with King David. And at the end, we learn a very important lesson about the importance of joy and the dignity of joy. So we begin by saying, "Vayosef o David akol b'chol Yisrael." David again gathered all the chosen men of Israel, which were 30,000. Vayakam vayelech David. David arose and went up, and all the people with him, from Bala Yehuda, from the towns of Yehuda, which is where the Ark of Hashem was. And this was the ark Moses made that had in it the tablets of the 10 Commandments, an artifact that God himself gave to Moses. Artifact and testimony to the giving of the Torah and the covenant of the Jewish people with God. And they created a new wagon, so there should be no question of impurity. And they put the ark of God, the Aron, on the wagon. And this was an error because the ark of Hashem is only supposed to be carried on the shoulders. And they carried it from the house of Avinadav, which was in Giva, which is in the tribe territory of Benjamin. And Uzzah and Achio, the children of Avinadav, Noagim, who were Kohanim, they drove the new cart. And they brought it out of the house of Avinadav, which is in Giva, it says hill, but it's really a particular hill, particular place in the portion of Benjamin, with the ark of Hashem. And Achio was walking before the Aron. David v'chol beis Yisrael, and David and all the house of Israel, Mesachakim, they were rejoicing before Hashem, b'chol atzei b'roshim, with all types of woodwinds made of cypress, uvikinoros, and with harps, uvinavolim, and navolim are like a guitar. It's a sounding chamber under strings. Uvesufim, and with drums, uvamananim, and with clappers, uvatzaltzalim, and with cymbals, V'yavo ad goren hanachon, and they came to the threshing floor of Nachon. V'yishlach Uzzah laron Elokim, and he put forth his hand to God's ark to steady it. He shamtu habakar, because the oxen stumbled. V'ichar Hashem b'Uzzah, and the anger of Hashem was kindled against Uzzah. It's in the passive because the anger of God means to say the intense revelation of divinity, which is present in the ark that no human being can stand. V'yakeu Shem Elokim, and God smote him there alashal, on his error. Vayomas Shem, and he died there right by the ark of Hashem. V'yichel David, David was very distressed, Shaparetz Hashem Peretz b'Uzzah, that God had broken forth, that Uzzah had been broken, and they called that place Peretz Uzzah, the place where Uzzah had been broken forth, Ada Yom Hazeh, until this day. The year of David as Hashem, God was in awe of Hashem on that day, and says, how shall Hashem's ark come to me? In other words, he was afraid that this was a sign from God that the Jews were not yet worthy of placing the ark in Jerusalem. So David did not want to move the Aron any further. V'yateu David, he put it at the house of Oved Edom, the Gittite, who lived right near there. And the ark of Hashem was in the house of Oved Edom 3 months. But then Hashem blessed Oved Edom. He had unusual success in all his house. So they told David, saying, look, Hashem is best, Oved Edom. So clearly Hashem is not upset. So this time David inquired and discovered that the ark is only meant to be carried. And they brought it up on the shoulders of the Kohanim this time. When they walked 6 paces, they stopped, and David sacrificed an ox, umari, and a large ram. And the reason they could do this is before the ark was placed in the temple, you could bring a sacrifice also outside the temple. But David mecharker b'cholos, and David was dancing, literally turning over with all his strength before Hashem. For David chagor ephod bad, and David was girded with a linen ephod. And David and all the house of Yisrael Malim, they brought up the ark of Hashem, Betrua, with the sounding of the trumpets and the voice of the shofar. And it came to the house of the city of David, which is Jerusalem. Specifically, they have excavations now. It is the south of Jerusalem, south of the Temple Mount. There used to be a sharp hill, and on that ridge was built the palace of David in the original city of Jerusalem. Umichal Bashal, and Michal, the daughter of Shaul, Nishkef Abada Chalon, she looked out the window. Vateras Amelech David Mefases Umakarka Lifnei Hashem, and she saw David jumping and somersaulting before Hashem, dancing with all his might. Vativas Lo Beliba, and she despised him in her heart. Michal was King Saul's daughter, and she thought it inappropriate that the king of Israel should be dancing and somersaulting and kicking up his legs. And David, they brought the ark of Hashem there, and they put it in its place in the tent, in the same Mishkan Moshe brought, and they had built, and they brought sacrifices. And in that temporary structure, it remained until Solomon built the temple. So when David returns to his house, Michal, the daughter of Shaul, goes out to greet him. And she says, how did the king of Israel honor himself today, that he uncovered himself like before all the servants, like some empty person? Well, okay, you're happy, but dancing and somersaulting. And so David said to Michal, that I swear before Hashem, who chose me above your father and his whole house. In other words, you're saying you're a princess and you know a king should behave. Hashem chose me, and I rejoice before Hashem. And let me be even more embarrassed, and let me be more humble and less worthy than the maidservants you spoke of. That will give me honor. So the point is that and to the point is that David tells Michal that the honor of the king is the joy to Hashem. There is no greater honor than celebrating and being joyous before Hashem. And before God, everyone is equal. And before God, there is no dignity other than the dignity of the great joy of the divine presence finally coming to the place that it was meant to be from the beginning of creation, which is the place the Beit HaMikdash would be built. So we have here in this Haftarah some very important ideas. The first is that the matters pertaining, just like in the Torah portion, matters pertaining to the temple are real. They're not symbolic. There is an intense revelation of divinity regarding the temple and the ark, especially anything to do with the Holy of Holies like the ark. And therefore, one needs to be very careful, simply because only by following the rules do we guarantee that we don't get so close to this revelation that it's more than we can handle, because the human body is limited, and there's a limit to how much spiritual intensity it can handle without blowing up. And therefore we see with Aaron's sons and with Uzzah, though they meant well, they, by not exactly following the rules, it's like, God forbid, looking at the sun without sunglasses. And this is exactly what happened. The second point is the great joy that David felt in being able to facilitate bringing the ark to Jerusalem and ultimately preparing the way to build the temple that his son would build. But we should know that there is no greater dignity and honor than the joy. In other words, the joy of being close to Hashem, the joy of the future revelation of divinity to the Jewish people is so great it makes us all equal. And there is never any shame in expressing one's joy in a mitzvah. When a person is a king or an important person, and in an ordinary manner of celebration, they debase their dignity, that's no good. But there is no debasement in the complete abandon to the joy of being close to Hashem. In a joy that we all share equally. In God's presence, we're all equal, we're all the same. And this is the point of this particular story. Now, in the next chapter, which us Judav and Nusach Ashkenaz read, we find that David says to Nathan the prophet, I dwell in a house of cedar, and God is still in a house of curtains. And Natan says to a king, well, why don't you start building the temple? And God says to Natan, no, you can't build me a temple. And he says, your child will build it. Now, in here, we don't say the reason, but in Divrei Amim, in the book of Chronicles and Ketuvim, a reason is given. It's just because you've shed much blood. The purpose of the temple, ultimately, it will be with the third temple, but the purpose of the temple is to bring to a world of complete peace and harmony. You have fought for the Jewish people, but bloodshed and building the temple go together, because the temple looks forward to a time when no nation will live up sword against nation, and so on. Another explanation is that since David put his life on the line and sacrificed himself to bring victory to the Jewish people, to secure them, because he put life on his line, because one only sheds blood if one's life is in danger, that blood he shed and the potential shedding of his own blood is such a great merit that had David built the temple could not have been destroyed. And we know that God destroys the temple to take out his anger at the Jewish people's failings on sticks and stones, rather than with the utter destruction of the Jewish people. So an indestructible temple is not a good thing. So another explanation is that the blood David shed, his own blood that he put on the line, the merit was so great that God wouldn't have been able to destroy that temple. But at any rate, the basic idea is that there are trade-offs. In other words, David had to fight those wars and battles. And we have to do things that are sometimes unpleasant, not wrong, but unpleasant for the right reasons. An ideal world, there's no bloodshed. Ideal world, all of humanity lives in peace and harmony. And King Solomon had for at least a few years, the 40 years of his reign, this ideal world, when there was no fighting in the region and all submitted him because of his wisdom and greatness, not because of his military power. So it was a little bit of a taste of the Messianic era. So such a person who rules by the power of his wisdom, such a person who lives in a time when God is so powerfully revealed that humanity tends, at least regionally, towards peace and harmony. So that's the person who can build the temple. Because the purpose of the Beis Hamikdash is that God's presence rests in the world, not just for the Jewish people, but that all of humanity feel the common creator that made us, and therefore be united in peace and harmony and felicity. Except that this will ultimately only happen with the Temple 3.0, with the third temple, which will be the perfect vision of the Beit HaMikdash that was not fully realized in the first or the second. Now, there's a very interesting thing. In verse 8 here, Hashem says, "Now, therefore shall you say to my servant David, thus said the Lord of hosts, I took you from the sheepfolds, from following the sheep, that you should be prince over my people, over Israel." So it says when David was a young man, perhaps a teenager, he was given charge of his father's flocks. And he discovered a problem, that when they came to a new pasture, the young, strong sheep would immediately go and gobble the best grass, leaving less for the baby sheep and for the old sheep. So the baby sheep didn't grow quick enough, and the old sheep, who were no longer nursing, and the old sheep deteriorated. So David thought about it, the Midrash says, and finally he went and he cut sticks, and he built 3 pens. And he put the old sheep in one pen. The young sheep had just been weaned in the second pen. And he put the big, strong sheep in their middle years in the third pen. Then he first let out the old sheep, the baby sheep, whose teeth were not, fully developed and who were small, and let them eat the tops of the grass, which is easiest to eat and most tender. Then he put them back in, and he took out the old sheep whose teeth were already worn down, and they ate the middle part of the grass. Then he let out the young, strong sheep, who, not having a choice, ate the grass that's closest to the ground. And it's chewy, tough grass, but they can handle it because they were young and strong and had the strongest teeth. And in doing so, he created the optimal nutrition for all 3 sets of sheep. So it says when God saw this, says that you devoted yourself so much with such wisdom and care and extra effort on your part to the welfare of your father's sheep and to the benefit of the sheep. So you're worthy to lead my people. If you put so much thought and care into sheep, all the more so you will with my people. And at that moment in David's youth, God chooses him to be the king of Israel and the ancestor of the dynasty that will end up with the Mashiach. So this is what God says. I took you out from the sheepfold. In other words, I saw how you behave with the sheep, and I saw this as a basis of good character, as how you will lead the Jewish people. So a very important lesson here is we see that the care and kindness that one shows to animals is not secondary, inconsequential. Though animals are not people and we're allowed to slaughter them in order to eat them and so on, but they're Hashem's creatures, and one must treat them with kindness and compassion, because animals feel fear and loss and sadness, and they feel pain just like we do. And therefore, we're obliged to treat them with sympathy and concern and sensitivity and kindness. And a person who mistreats animals is likely to mistreat people. And someone who, not always, but a person who is genuinely kind to animals, even though they don't have rights, as if it were human rights. So a person who is kind even to animals is likely to be kind to people, because cruelty is in itself a bad trait, and indifference to suffering is in itself a bad trait. And even if it relates to animals that are not human and don't have the same rights and privileges as humans, it's a bad thing. And conversely, thought, care, sympathy, kindness are all qualities that are in themselves good, even as related to an animal. There are similar stories to David about Moses that where, again, there's a midrash that tells us that Moshe lost a little sheep got lost. Instead of saying, it's just one sheep, it's not my sheep anyways, it's my father-in-law's, he went looking for the lost little sheep and for the lost lamb. And he found it exhausted, lost in the desert. So even though Moshe could have said, well, this animal is too far gone, instead he picked it up and carried it on his shoulders because it was too tired to walk. And at that moment, when he does that, God says, someone with that degree of sympathy and caring is fitting to be the shepherd of my flock, which is the Jewish people. And at that moment, Moses sees this apparition of the burning bush, and puts the sheep down on the ground and walks towards the apparition, and the rest, as they say, is history. So we see that to our sages, to our tradition, the care, kindness, and thoughtfulness about animals is a sign of a good person. And there's a very important lesson here. That is why it says, Hashem says, I have taken you from the sheepfold. And here God also promises David that when there is a proper king of Israel, it will be his descendants, no matter how much that will be interrupted. Okay. Any questions or comments on this week's Haftarah?
Wow. I go back to the question of the dancing. David's dancing. I'm a little bit puzzled about the somersaults. There is the portion where the priests are told they have to build the altar on flat ground, not stairs to approach it, and that was a reason of modesty and the manner in which they dressed in those days, which was the flowing gowns, but they were not fitted out with underwear, so to speak.
Oh, they did wear underwear. We see with the Kohanim they wore underwear. Everyone wore, at least among the Jewish people, they wore mechdasayim, which are basically underpants that come down to just above the knee.
Oh, I did not know that.
The Kohanim wore them, and that was a common thing. Especially,
but isn't there a part where they're told that it has not to go on stairs?
No, but that's because even though that Rashi explicitly addresses that, Sylvia, that even though they wear the underpants, it's still not nice. It's still somewhat exposing.
Okay, so we have to assume that David had underwear on.
Yeah, because if the Kohanim wore it, I assume generally speaking, more fancy people wore underwear.
Okay, that's it seems like a slight thing,
No,
but
but
it
that's
isn't slight.
why Michal was upset because his knees were showing when he did a somersault. That's not appropriate for the king.
Okay. So the joy that he was feeling is the important part of that lesson.
Right, but I was just saying it is a practical concern you raised, and that's the issue.
Okay. And I think about Uzo, who was lost his life.
And died.
Right. So I don't think who was Uzo?
Uzo was one of the Kohanim who was in charge of the movement of the ark. The son of Aviatar was the Kohen Gadol, I believe.
And this was something. There was nobody with him that also suffered.
No, because he's the one who touched it. In other words, it's not that he committed a crime. It's that he entered a zone that he couldn't handle.
Or was not permitted to handle.
Right, not permitted in this case because the divinity that's present there is too intense for an ordinary person to handle unless God provides special protection. That's why those who carry the ark were not harmed.
Wasn't there something about fear of the ark tipping and falling?
Yeah, well, that was the thing that he should have realized, that the ark can take care of itself, as if it were. That, in other words, but the real issue was that it was being harnessed to oxen in the first place. But at any rate, he shouldn't, he should have relied, that it's not going to fall off.
Okay.
That's the premise, because the truth is the ark was extraordinarily heavy because it had so much gold in it. And the truth is that those who carried it didn't find it difficult to carry because the ark, it says, carried those who carried it. So if he would have been aware of that, he would have understood that the ark supported itself. It had some kind of supernatural gyroscope. So he shouldn't have, because the ark carried along those who carried it. So he shouldn't have been concerned, and he might have forgotten about it in the heat of the moment. But the whole thing wouldn't have happened if they would have carried it as they were supposed to, rather than put it on an ox cart. And that was David and everyone else's mistake, because the ark had not been carried for so many years that they forgot about it.
Thank you.
Anyways, so Bobby, Sylvia, and all those watching on the various platforms, take care. All the best.
Thank you very much, Rabbi.
Take care. Have a good night, everyone.
Good night.
Night. Take care. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.